Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Watson Library. Thank you all for being here. I'm glad it didn't. Is it still raining? I don't know. I'm hopefully not. But my name is Sarah Goodwin-Thiel, and I am the Faculty and Community Engagement Librarian here at KU Libraries. I'm also the coordinator of the Haricombe Gallery. The Haricombe Gallery is a space that promotes the creative scholarship of our campus community, highlights the strengths of our library's collections, and works in partnership with cultural venues, internal and external to KU. Taking It to the Streets, our current exhibit, is an exhibition about publicly engaged research and creative work, scholarship that reaches beyond the university. The KU Public Scholars Group, a partnership between the Center for Faculty Development and Mentoring, the KU Center for Research, and the Hall Center for the Humanities, encourages and equips academics to increase access to their research and creative work. The objective of the Public Scholars Group is to foster constructive, informed dialogue with the broader public. And going along with that idea, the Taking It to the Streets exhibit explores the platforms used to provide accessible research-based communication, and it highlights some of the work being done by KU and community public scholars. The research presented here, as always with Haricombe Gallery exhibits, is just the tip of the iceberg. In this case, of publicly facing scholarship generated at KU and throughout our community. KU libraries are honored to celebrate our public scholars and their efforts to broaden the reach of their research, talents, and expertise. I hope you had a chance to sit down in our new virtual viewing space, the Haricombe Gallery, and watch the online exhibition. If you did not get to do that and don't have time to stay after the program that you have on your seats has a QR code and a URL for the exhibition, which is in story map format. So you can take that home and look at it whenever you please. You don't have to be here in the library to see the exhibition. As always, it took a lot of people to make this evening possible. I'd first like to thank the Haricombe Gallery program team, assistant coordinators Samantha Bishop-Simmons, Owen Murphy and Kevin McCarty for their excellent curation and installation of Taking It to the Streets. Our interim co-deans of libraries, Beth Whitaker and Scott Hanrath, for their ongoing support. All of our library colleagues who every day support KU research and creative work. And a special nod to the Office of Communication and Advancement team for their wonderful event management and promotion work. I would also like to thank our pianist this evening, Danielle Yang from the KU School of Music. She does a beautiful job. Thank you so much. And now I would like to introduce Beth Whitaker, Director of Spencer Research Library and Interim Co-Dean of KU Libraries.
Good evening, everybody. It is so great to look out and see so many faces here on our rainy and probably rather chilly night. It feels warm indeed. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce you to Chip Taylor, University of Kansas Emeritus Professor of the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology and founder and director of Monarch Watch. Trained as an insect ecologist at the University of Connecticut, his research projects have included studies, there's a bunch of stuff here that I don't understand, but I'm going to say it anyway. Studies of reproductive isolating mechanisms in sulfur butterflies. Is that a real thing? Okay. Reproductive and life history patterns in plants, comparative biology of European and neotropical African honeybees, and the one that I do understand, migratory behavior of monarch butterflies. And those topics really underscore why we need to have people with a wide variety of academic research experience and subject expertise, because no one can understand everything, and it's a great testament to the importance of community-engaged scholarship. So in 1992, Chip founded Monarch Watch, an outreach program that's focused on education, research, and conservation relative to monarch butterflies. And since then, Monarch Watch has enlisted the help of volunteers to tag monarchs during the fall migration. And in fact, over 2 million monarchs have been tagged by volunteers since 1992. And I have to say that I believe my children have tagged some of those. I'm sure many of you who've been in Lawrence have experienced Monarch Watch in a lot of different ways, and it's really an exciting program. The data from this program are providing many new insights about the dynamics of the fall monarch migration. Chip received a Growing Green Award from the National Resource Defense Council in 2014 for his work on behalf of monarch conservation. And he's actually received many other awards and grants over his career, including grants from the National Science Foundation, the United States Department of Agriculture, the National Geographic Society, and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So I could talk a lot about his work. His accomplishments are numerous, but you don't want to hear me, you want to hear Chip. And so tonight we are going to listen to him talk about how catching a turtle led to a career in science. So please help me welcome Chip Taylor. Are you just, oh, you got it.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you,
I
Beth.
don't have to worry about you.
By the way, folks that are standing up back there are a few more seats up here in the front.
Yeah.
Yeah, come on down, folks, as they used to say. All right. Well, I don't know about you folks, but I wake up in the morning and I look in the mirror and I say, an old guy with long hair. And that long hair got to be this way because of COVID. It's kind of my badge of dishonor for COVID. But anyway, this is going to start out with Chip Taylor, little Chippy, who I don't recognize anymore and this little Chippy was 7 years old. And at 7 years old, he was holding up a turtle, a snapping turtle that probably weighed 10 pounds in his, what hand is this? I'm getting old. It's the left, right? So the left hand I'm left-handed. I catch those things left-handed. I've picked up a lot of things left-handed, some of which have made me want to change my clothes and take a shower. Don't pick up a Tim and do it. That's what I'm telling you. All right. But I learned to catch porcupines barehanded, believe it or not. That was an achievement. Learned from National Geographic, by the way. But anyway, I'm going to tell you a story in 3 parts today. One is from little Chippy and how little Chippy's experience, which was capped off by a picture in the family history of this little kid, 7 years old, holding up this turtle. I have been looking for that picture forever, and I've never been able to find it. And I told this story to a visitor, a woman that came to me and interviewed me, and I gave her a lot of my time, told her this story about the little Chippy holding the turtle, and I met her again, and she came up with this gift. This was created by somebody that she knows in Disney, and I was not harassing this turtle, believe it or not, but I was obeying my grandmother's dictate, which is don't get in front of this turtle. If it bites you, it won't let go until sundown. I'm going, oh my goodness, My grandmother was full of things like that. She was full of a lot of stuff. She was a first-generation German. Her parents came from the Black Forest. She was full of folklore. I was 6, 7, and 8 years old. I was visiting her in the summer. I couldn't tell fact from fiction when I talked to my grandmother, but I was amazed. She had lots of interesting ideas about life and about wildlife. She lived on that time, and when I visited her, on 80 acres in northern Wisconsin, near a place called Crivets. And it had a stream going through that property, part of the Peshtigo River, which is the tributary that leads to the Peshtigo fire. If you're interested in forest fires, look up the Peshtigo fire. It scared the daylights out of you. The worst forest fire the world has ever seen. Killed thousands of people. But in any case, I'm going too slowly here. I'm getting wound up in my storytelling when I should be moving on because I got a lot of slides and you don't want to be here all night. Anyway, on that 80-acre property, this is Grandma Emma Wasmond, and she gave birth to Helen Wasmond Taylor. That was my mother. My grandmother was full of interest in natural things. I was my mother's child who was interested in natural things. My mother being giving to my grandmother. She tolerated a lot of stuff I brought into the house. So it was furthered from generation to generation. Anyway, grandmother had a neighbor, and that neighbor was Mr. Chilcote, and Mr. Chilcote kept bees. And whenever I looked at his bees when I visited his place with my grandmother, he'd say, get away from those bees. They're going to sting you. I don't want to know about it. I knew he had a secret. So at that point, I decided I wanted to learn his secret because he made the best honey in the world. Honey that came in these section boxes. You know what a section box is? A basswood section box. They're long gone in the bee business. But at that time, in the early 40s, honey used to come in these boxes, 1 pound boxes of comb honey. And he had the best comb honey in the world. That plays into my future, by the way. Everything that I did with my grandmother played into my future. My interest in butterflies, my interest in bees, and my interest in Native Americans. And that has come into my life as well. That property was the home of pre-Columbian northern tribal peoples that lived on that land and moved from place to place along that river, harvesting the clams, harvesting the various things, harvesting the hazelnuts and the berries. It was a magnificent property with all sorts of artifacts. So that experience, those 3 summers in a row, really set the tone for my life. And there's the river with thousands of rocks that I turned over, which I found magical things under those rocks. Mud puppies. You ever seen a mud puppy? Mud puppies. Salamanders about that long, big orange red gills. You're a 7-year-old kid and you see that thing under the rocks and you go, what is that? And you go reach in there carefully to get it and zoom, it's gone. Slimiest thing you ever grabbed your hands around. Anyway, that was the river, but Mr. Chilcote inspired me to become a beekeeper at age 14. Here I am at age 16 probably, selling crystal chip honey to the local people. We lived on Crystal Lake. Crystal Lake and Crystal Chip was the natural consequence. All right. So eventually I went on to college, and eventually I started out being my father's son and trying to get a degree as a CPA. That didn't work. Didn't work at all. So I went on and I looked at coleus butterflies for my PhD. Those are the sulfur butterflies that occur in alfalfa fields. They're very, very common. 2 species that were hybridizing, and we didn't know why they were hybridizing. We looked at different parts of the country, and there were different hybridization rates. And the question was, why were they hybridizing at all? Because 2 species aren't supposed to do that. The second question is, what were the dynamics that were leading to the hybridization? So that was the first scientific area that I got into. That was the first part of my career until I became allergic to them. And then I had to change my career. So then I got into this older activity of mine, which was keeping bees. Because I was a self-taught beekeeper, a self-taught bee biologist, if you will. And so when the African bee thing started out in South America, I got involved with African bees through a grant with the USDA. And that work went on from about 1974, I think it says there, right through 1996. And then I became aware that things were changing in the bee business in the sense of who was going to fund whom. And I saw that everything was going to go into molecular genetics. So then I decided I had to reinvent myself again. And I reinvented myself as a monarch biologist. And that has continued from 1992 to 2023, as you see me now. And then we entered into a phase in Monarch Watch in which our focus changed from education and research to conservation. A rapid run to try to offset a lot of the degradation that was happening that was eliminating milkweed through changes in agriculture. So those are the kinds of careers I've had. I've had essentially 4 careers. I'll explain a little bit about them. But each one of these efforts has involved outreach. Each one of these efforts has involved trying to communicate what I know with the public. And so with that, I'll go on to the questions that I was trying to seek, and then you'll see some of the things I had to do in order to address these scientific interests I had, as well as the successes, and I won't get into the failures, but there have been some of those too, and trying to communicate with the public and trying to address the science as well. So this is Coleus eurythmi, female. It's one of the two species of sulfur butterflies we were working with. And the other one is a female that looks just like this, but it is yellow, no orange at all. So the species differed in color, and they differed in UV reflection patterns in the males, and they differed in pheromones and so on and so forth, and that all became part of the interest here. And I educated several PhD students working on these butterflies as well. So the question was, why were these species hybridizing, and why did it vary seasonally and geographically? And the result was that I discovered, and this was one of the kind of really interesting discoveries in my life, is that the ability of the females to select males of their same species was a function of the maturation of the sensory systems that determined how they could detect one male from the other. So in one of the species, they matured so fast that it only took them about 10 minutes after they emerged from a chrysalis to be able to select males of their own species. For the other species, the orange one, it took them about 45 minutes. Well, if you're vulnerable to not being able to select mates of the right species for 45 minutes, you're vulnerable to being hybridized with. And that's what I ran into. I ran into this situation in which it turned out that the relationships between these two species and the amount of hybridization was density dependent, that is, how abundant the population was, and the frequencies of each species relative to each other. That was just amazing. So if the populations are really dense, so the contact rate was really high, females would be mated within 30 seconds after emerging from a chrysalis, or minutes. So if the population was really low, the females would mature and not being able to mature enough to be able to reject males of the opposite species. Anyway, it was a very interesting dynamic. So it's not as complicated, Beth, as you might. Do you understand that now? All right, thank you. All right. After that, becoming allergic to those butterflies, I had to find something else to do. And I was encouraged to get involved with bees because that was my earlier interest due to my interest in Chilcote's honey. And I developed the killer bee team. This is the first killer bee team. You know lots of sports teams that are called the killer bee team. I had the first. All right, the first. And these are the guys that were the first killer bee team down in French Guiana. That's where we first started working with these bees. And then we moved to Venezuela. I had students working in Colombia, students working in Costa Rica, later Mexico, and so on. So a lot of adventures with these bees. I could keep you here for a couple of hours talking about all of the crazy things that happened with those bees. But here, at this side of the picture, you see these killer bee teams assembled once again, quite a bit older when they came to Lawrence a few years ago. So what were we doing with European and neotropical African honeybees? The problem that we ran into initially was that those bees were hybridizing almost exclusively with European queens. So a European queen, there are two types of honeybees here. You know, the honeybees that we deal with here are derived from bees from Europe. The honeybees that we're talking about here were introduced to Brazil from South Africa. Kind of a different subspecies with a lot of different characteristics. And that population was building up very fast and moving very fast into the Americas, advancing at a terrific rate, and known for being horrendous stinging machines, which were involved in the deaths of a lot of animals and quite a few people. So our task was to try to figure out what was going on and try to figure out why the European queens were mating almost exclusively with African drones. And that led us to a lot of work where we were trying to figure out the mating system of honeybees, which had never been worked out before. And the bottom line here is that we found out that if we used the proper tools and lots of marked drones, these are the guys that I was working with, I'll skip on fast. One of the tools had to be the development of a drone trap and thousands of marked drones so we could determine where they were going, how far they were going, and whether there were differences between European bees and African bees in terms of drone behavior. And there wasn't any difference between the two of those subspecies, but what there was that came out of this was that each apiary had a gametic shadow, a drone shadow. You can talk about the reproductive potential of an apiary. So these apiaries of European bees are little islands. And so they have this shadow of influence. And the shadow of influence drops off really fast. The density of European drones goes way down after about half a mile. And then you have this long tail in this distribution. Well, when African bees moved in, they also have these little islands, and they also have these drones casting shadows. And what was happening is that the queens from the European colonies were flying beyond the drones of their own sort and mating with drones from all of these African colonies. There were a sea of African drones because they were filling on all of the empty spaces between the European apiaries. Anyway, tremendously interesting dynamic, but I've got to go on. So I won't tell you all the names that were given to this object, but but this is a mating tube, otherwise known by my students by other names. But it was kind of an artificial vagina, which I was using to determine whether the drones of each type selected females of different types, and they don't. Those males are randy and they'll jump on anything, even a tube. All right, that's just a joke. Anyway, we were using X-band radar, Korean War radar, to track these drones. And we worked in a lot of different places to do this. And it was fascinating work. It was probably the best work we ever did, was trying to work out this honeybee mating system, even surpassing everything I've done with coleus and monarch butterflies. After a lot of that, I dealt with students. I taught a honeybee course for a very long time. And I got students, including my assistant here and Ryan, to go down to Oklahoma to go to the place where we knew there were African bees in Oklahoma. We set up a lot of what we call bait hives, put them up in trees like this, and a month later we come back and they're full of bees. And then we would harvest these bees. This shows you the nice white combs with some of these colonizations. They are attracted to the box, but they don't go into it. They actually make their combs on the outside. And then the next slide shows us harvesting these for morphometric and genetic analysis. Well, all of my honeybee work led to a lot of outreach. So here I am holding a queen in a cage with a lot of bees coming to me. Beth, it's all right. You don't have to be scared, Beth. I mean, seriously, Beth, this is all right, all right? Beth, behind me or in front of me when I'm doing all of this, I've got 200 people. And they're sitting closer to me than you are. And I've got all of these bees coming to me, all right? And I'm trying to show them that if you know where the queen is, and you've got the bees looking for their queen, you can get them to come to you. You don't have to run out of the room, okay? So basically, you know where the queen is, right? She's attached to my belt in the back, and I can bring a whole swarm to me. And this is a trick that I did with these people just to demonstrate I know a lot about swarm behavior, teach them basic pheromone response to behavioral response to pheromones and so on. And you can see I'm talking to a big crowd. And these are beekeeping people. They know the bees aren't going to sting. They've got bees flying all over them. They're like a crowd here. They got bees flying all around. And they know the bees aren't engaged in stinging. They're engaged in finding their queen. So everything goes well. And at the end of those demonstrations, I've got this little kid. I'm holding his hand, and I'm saying, you can do it. You make a cup, and you push your hand right up into the swarm, and then you pull it this way. And the bees will fall into your hand, and they won't sting because they want to stay together. And that works so well that I've got legions of little kids coming up there wanting to put their hands in the swarm. And adults too. And this is Jenny, and she is so proud of herself because she's got a handful of bees and she'd never touched bees before. So this is kind of the outreach I was involved with at honeybees. So then we takes us to the monarch migration. And so I wanted to answer the question as to what regions of the country were more successful in getting butterflies to the overwintering sites in Mexico. And for that, of course, I had to use this tagging method for these 2 million tagged butterflies. And what I can tell you about all of that, because there's a lot of results to tell you, is that about 80% originate from north of 40 North. Now, north of 40 North starts at St. Joseph. So if you imagine what's going on in the summer months, monarchs are going through 2 generations north of us here. And those are the monarchs that mostly get to Mexico. South of 40 North, there is a few butterflies getting to Mexico, but not very many. So about 80% of them, at least 80% of them, it might be 90%, we have a hard time sorting it out, actually originate north of us. And isn't that amazing? So the migration isn't really populated by butterflies coming out of Texas in the fall. It's populated by butterflies coming out of the north region of the continent. And if we look at the longitudinal range, we can look from western Pennsylvania to the middle of the Dakotas, and that accounts for about 90% of the butterflies that get to Mexico. So that means that if you go from 80 west to the Maritimes, which is about 65 west, only about 8 to 10% of the butterflies coming out of that region are represented in the butterflies that get to Mexico. So the reason is, conceivably, that they have to go longer distance. And I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit, cut down on time. So this is the tagging, and this is a map showing all of the taggers, about 8,000 different tagging locations. And to make my point here about distance and success, take a look at this. Where you originate from makes a difference in terms of your probability of getting to Mexico and how long it's going to take you. So if you go to the point furthest on the left, out here to the west, that's the shortest route. If you go to the Maritimes, Prince Edward Island or someplace like that, that's virtually twice as long. And here it is in miles, and here it is in days. So to get to Mexico from the west, that is to get to the crossing point at Del Rio on the border, it takes about 40 days from, say, the mid-Dakotas. And if you go from the Maritimes to the Del Rio crossing, it takes about 80 days. Twice as long, twice as many hazards. Probability of getting to Mexico is far reduced the further east you go. This is a simple dynamic. And it's even more complex than that because there are pathways involved. And the pathways that go down the Atlantic coast are filled with hazards. And a lot of butterflies are swept out to sea. So this explains why the east is so poorly represented in the butterflies that get to the overwintering sites, except when everything crashes in the west. So if we have a 2012, which was the hottest summer we have seen in several decades here, the population in the Midwest crashed, and 25% of the butterflies that were represented in the collections of tags that we got in Mexico that winter were from the Northeast. So it's a proportional sort of thing, right? They get to Mexico from the Northeast, but it's relative to what we get from the Midwest. So interesting dynamics. So there's a lot of interesting things going on in Mexico. And here I am standing in a stream of butterflies that are coming down off the colonies to get water. They get water because they need water to metabolize the lipids. The lipids, once they're metabolized, produce a blood sugar called trehalose. And that blood sugar, which is universal to almost all insects, and about 90% of their sugars that they use to metabolize their muscles and what have you, that is really essential. But if they run out of water, they can't metabolize those fats. So they have to get water. So they race down to get water. And if you've ever seen anything like this anywhere on the planet, let me know, because I've never seen it anywhere, and I don't know of anything anywhere that is like this. This is a fantastic experience to be standing in essentially a river of butterflies that is coming off these colonies. and they're going down to get water, and then they'll come down one pathway, and then they'll go back up another pathway. And it's fascinating to watch. All right. And as outreach for monarchs, of course, the outreach involves all those tagging activities. It involves teaching people how to tag butterflies. It teaches people how to raise butterflies. It teaches people in many different ways how to appreciate butterflies. And of course, the outreach extends to school activities, getting into schools and teaching students how to do this. Our outreach extends to creating habitats, like the Monarch Way Station program that we started in 2005 to compensate for all the habitats that were being lost. And we're creating signs and signage to indicate not only what the basis of the migration is, but also to teach people that it's valuable to create and maintain habitats that support monarch butterflies and pollinators. And this shows you our Monarch Way Station program, where we now have over 41,000 registered monarch way stations. This shows you the distribution of a program which we involve schools and nonprofits. We send out milkweeds to free schools, or to schools, send it out free to schools and nonprofits over the country. We sent out something like, we've got about 1,700 schools that we have supplied with milkweed for native gardens. We vet all of those applications. That sort of activity is has been underwritten by NRDC, other NGOs, and our own activities. Then we've also been involved in restoration, actively involved in restoration. This is where we're trying to restore things along the highway, I-35 in Oklahoma, near Guthrie. A lot of those things work and some of them don't. But anyway, we're learning as we go. So, when you get involved talking to senior scientists, you want to know whether they've had any eureka moments, right? Did you have any eureka moments? Yeah. You have any really discoveries? A lot of us don't. I've had 4. I've had 4 really good ones. And I can't explain them all to you, but I've explained one already. One with coleus, when I discovered that females matured at a different rate relative to the different species. Then I had a pheromone moment. I was trying to create a pheromone that would attract bees to boxes, to attract bees to where I wanted to be so I could catch the swarms. And long story short is that I ran into some lemongrass. And I was sniffing the lemongrass and showing it off to a whole bunch of people. And then I went out to watch this colony that was about to swarm. And as I'm looking up at all my baits up hanging in the trees, I wasn't paying much attention, except I could see the bees were still coming out of the colony. And then I noticed something. I heard a lot of buzzing. I'd thrown a veil over my head because those bees are kind of pecky. And then I looked down. I wondered where all the bees are coming from, all the sound was. And the bees were running up my chest. And they were running up because I hadn't tied down the veil. And they went up right there, and they were right on my mustache. Beth, it's all right, Beth. It was all right. They were in my mustache, and I said, damn, I got to make this stuff smell like lemongrass. Well, I figured out how to do that, and we caught thousands of swarms. Later on, when I was in Mexico, we caught 2,000 swarms using that lure. So, yeah. And then I had a moment when I discovered that drones use pathways. Another really kind of an interesting story. Crossing a bit of prairie, which is kind of an accidental discovery because the apparatus I was using broke. So I had a queen on a kite line, and the balloon that was supporting all of this broke, but I still had the queen. And as I walked to the edge of this ravine, all of a sudden I had drones coming to my queen. And I walked down to the bottom of the pit, no drones. Walked up to the other side, no drones. Something's happening here. Walked back to the original point, and there were drones. They were flying right along this edge. And that changed everything when we're looking for drones, because on the radar we could see all these areas where they were massing, but we couldn't figure out how they were getting there. And once we understood that they were using pathways, we learned how to identify those pathways, and we learned how to take advantage of them. So that was another eureka moment. And then another one was figuring out that this whole migration of monarch butterflies is coordinated with the solar angle of the sun at solar noon. In other words, the migration starts at a certain point and it ends at a certain point. They start in Winnipeg when the sun angle at solar noon drops below 57, and they arrive in Mexico at the overwintering sites when the sun angle at solar noon drops below 57. Damn, how do they do that? They're responding to some celestial cue. We still don't know what it is, but it determines the speed of the migration. They start out slowly. Sun angle moves slowly at first. Mid-latitudes, it moves faster. The migration moves faster. Lower latitudes, the sun angle at solar noon moves slower. The migration moves slower. So those are my epiphanies. Now I've got a couple of other things to tease you with, and I'll quit in a second. We got involved with a lot of things that have come to us. And we had an ultralight that came to us. I foolishly got strapped into this ultralight. It's a bathtub with an 80 horsepower motor on it with big wings. I took a nice picture of the fields of the football stadium and a lot of others. We got involved with NASA, put monarchs in space, involved some 400 schools in that project. I got busy with Stan Hurd. We made the biggest pollinator stamp the world has ever seen. You know, a field crop vision of the pollinator stamp. Worked with Martin Wikelski and National Geographic to put the first radio tag on a monarch butterfly. The monarch butterfly was big boy. This is the biggest butterfly we had. When we first put the tag on it, didn't go very far. Then we lost it. We were out at the airport out here in the Lawrence Airport. And after lunch, we took off looking for this butterfly. We found it 11.4 miles northeast of Lawrence in a farmer's field. And it was my job to go and knock on the door and hope there wasn't a shotgun behind it and ask him if we could look for our butterfly in their field. You never know, you know. Fortunately, I had the woman director of this whole thing with me, and she looked kind of harmless, so I guess it worked out all right. All right, I've been involved in several film projects. This was working with Louis Schwarzberg. I urge you guys to look up Louis Schwarzberg. He's doing some wonderful things with photography and getting a message out about gratitude, how we should all be very grateful for what we have and what we know. And I worked with him in Kansas, and we worked in Mexico. Also worked on another film, which is going around still, called Flight of the Butterflies. And this is one of the kind of strange things we got involved with that came to us. People asked us, hey, can you help us out with a Superfund site? Superfund site was extremely contaminated. And they had taken off the topsoil, but they knew they couldn't put a house on it. So the question was, what can we do with this to make it a public space? So I designed 4 gardens, a butterfly garden, a bee garden, and a bird garden, and a monarch garden. And their job was to get out there and plant those things. And we had about 1,600 plants. Marguerite back here was helpful on that. Tony was helpful on that as well. And I called in all of my favors from all of the teachers and people that I knew. I got 110 people out there to plant 1,600 plants in a short time. We thought it would probably take 3 or 4 hours. They got those plants in the ground in 55 minutes. Then we had to figure out how to feed them. Not the plants, but the people. Talk to them, make it worthwhile for them to come out. But that's the crowd. And this is what these gardens look like now, really fully vegetated and very good pollinator and demonstration places, and the site of a lot of visitation for events during the week. This is another interesting project I got involved with. Sorry this is taking so long, but I hope you're interested. This is Gwyneth Vetter-Dersch, who came to me via a letter that I got from New York City. She said, I grew up in Iowa, I loved monarch butterflies, I'm now a ballerina, and I want to use my talents to promote monarch butterflies. So we communicated many times, got together with her. They got some money together. I wasn't in a real position to help her at that time. They got some money together. We went out to Concept Prairie, and we made a little film, no voice, a little film that was basically a stylistic representation of her feeling about monarch butterflies. It was called The Awakening. And I helped her with one scene. And there is one scene when she holds her hand close to her heart. Strange. This butterfly does things to you. And anyway, she opens her hand, and the butterfly flies out. Right? So she's still at it. On February 12th, she put on a production in New York City called The Girl with a Butterfly Heart, in which she did this whole thing. I couldn't go, of course. It was Super Bowl Sunday. And you've probably heard of Sarah. This is another young lady that came to me. And she said, I've got this idea that I can use my talents, which are riding a bike, to emphasize the importance of monarch conservation. I said, well, what do you want to do? She said, I want to go to Mexico and I want to ride my bike north as the butterflies come north out of the colonies. I want to take the path through the summer and I want to ride down again in the fall. And I said, you're crazy. You're going to be killed. Come on, you can't do this. This makes no sense at all to me. I mean, it's really hazardous. You know it's hazardous, right? But she said, well, I got on my bike and I rode it all the way from Bolivia up to the United States. I said, you did? And I said, okay, I better shut up right now. I'll help you out as much as I can. And we helped her out. And she took her bike and made that trip 10,201 miles. And over, I don't know how many, 11-month period or something like that. It was a magnificent, and she wrote a book, and we had a book signing, and she's had book signings all over the country, and we had an arrangement here where we were working with the local bookseller to have a recognition of her achievement, and her book has been recognized as one of the best kind of experiential books of the year. Yeah, and the Raven has those books on the shelf. Yeah, so it's bicycling with butterflies. So, anyway, this is one of my inventions, a drone trap. This made the whole work on honeybee mating successful. These are the drone lures I was talking about, having that experience of having that epiphany about having it smell like lemongrass or lemon pledge. Developed an artificial nectar for butterflies, which really works well, doesn't ever ferment. And now we have an artificial diet for the monarchs themselves, which has enabled all sorts of research. And lastly, our outreach extends to having open houses at Monarch Watch. We urge you to come to Monarch Watch for an open house, if you so choose. And we have plant fundraisers in the spring, second Saturday in May. Usually get rid of about 8,000 plants in about 6 hours. We have people from all over the country come to these events because we have plants that are really in good condition that nobody else has. And Beth, we do not have honeybees. So, well, we do in the observation hive, but they won't bother you, okay? Well, with that, I'll tell you a little bit about our tribal work. As I mentioned, I was connected with Native Americans, and we got involved with a project working with Native Americans starting in 2015. We produced about 7 greenhouses on different properties, taught them how to transplant plants, taught them how to collect seeds, how to process seeds, how to grow out seeds, how to plant. This is one of my favorite pictures of a team coming back from planting. These people love to do something that's really positive on their own lands, and that's really good. And this is proof of concept. These plants, you can barely see them because there's hardly a leaf left. This is proof of concept. They were planted the year before, coming up the next spring. Monarch butterflies find them, lay lots of eggs on them, eat them to the ground, and we love it. All right. And that's the end. That's all that Toto and I have to say. This is also the end. And so is this. Sorry, it took too long. I was trying to do this in 35 minutes, but it didn't work out.
That was pretty wonderful. Does anyone have questions for Chip?
Yeah.
Yep.
About the infrared,
Talking to them.
how does infrared play? You said that
Oh, ultraviolet.
the ultraviolet, I mean, how that, apparently the drones are responding to infrared and choosing a mate, or is that how that works?
Pheromones.
Pheromones, I mean, yes.
The drones are responding to the queen odor. The interesting thing is that they don't respond to queen odor when they're in the colony, but once they get up in the air and they're searching for a queen, man, that's what they're looking for. And you put a little queen odor on one of those little tubes, and you get a lot of attention by the drone. It's a queen odor thing. Now, the UV story is a different one,
Oh, that's good.
because that involves butterflies. And what we had in that orange species of butterfly,
Yeah,
the males have a UV reflectance pattern. And that UV reflectance pattern is needed by the females to recognize the males of their own species. But for the first 45 minutes of their life, they don't recognize that pattern. So their visual system hasn't been mature enough to pick up a recognition of the male signal that that species is giving off. And that makes them vulnerable to hybridization with the males of the other species who don't care who they mate with.
Yeah.
That's the way it works.
Kind of like the K-State versus KU thing.
Well, I don't think we're going to go that far.
Anybody else?
Okay, Chip, I got to clarify something for me. I remember a story about ducks on the roof getting you involved in.
That's a family story. It's an embarrassing story. There's also another embarrassing story that my brother told me, told at this fest that they had for me about the skunk that I picked up that I was going to skin, but it was cold and I put it out on the roof because it was winter time and it was still freeze until I forgot about it and it got warmer. Well, things happen, you know. Anybody else? Well, I appreciate you all coming here. This is wonderful to get together with you. Go get your turtle.
Okay, well, Chip, thank you so much. This was just a delight, and I think all of us really appreciated everything you guys said. And thanks very much to all of you for being here with us tonight. KU Library's ability to host these events is due in large part to the consummate support of its advocates and friends. And many of these key supporters are here tonight. Thank you to all of our supporters. As such, I want to conclude by inviting you to consider becoming a friend of KU Libraries. Contributing to KU Libraries means providing support across campus, benefiting every student, faculty member, and unit at KU. On your program, along with the URL and the QR code for the exhibit, you'll see a link that you can visit online if you wish to contribute so that we can continue to make these events possible. Thank you very much. Have a safe and happy spring break. Thanks so much for coming.